Henry VIII is the most brutal and barbaric king in the history of the English monarchy. He executed roughly 70,000 people during his reign, and that included 2 of his own wives and some of his closest friends. But even with the fear that he held over people after he died in a strangely calm manner in comparison to his life, he wasn't given the final resting place that he so wished for. Instead, he is buried alongside his 3rd wife and a king who lost his head in a very easy-to-miss location within the confines of St. George's Chapel. Now, Henry VIII died on the 28th of January 1547. He was obese and suffered with things such as leg ulcers and mood swings. At the time of his death, Henry was in a place of calm and quiet. No one would tell him the inevitable, and he eventually died from what is believed to have been organ failure linked to obesity. And his last words are, "I will first take a little sleep, and then, as I feel myself, I will advise upon the matter." Henry was then buried into a small tomb under the floor of the choir in St. George's Chapel, alongside his 3rd wife, who had died years previously. Now, Jane Seymour was Henry's 3rd wife, and she had died due to post-childbirth complications after delivering Henry with the son that he so greatly wanted, Edward VI. Now, Jane died in 1537 on the 24th of October, so that by the time Henry died, she had been dead for 9.5 years. Historians claim that it was postnatal complications after a very long labour and birth, which lasted 2 days and 3 nights, and then she was buried on the 12th of November, 1537 in St. George's Chapel. And when the tomb was eventually opened almost 300 years later, Jane's coffin was said to be in the perfect condition, unlike Henry's, which had holes in the woodwork, and his skeleton could therefore be seen clearly, and it was damaged in places. Now, Charles I is the 3rd person to be buried within this tomb. This was never meant to be his resting place, and it was accidental. He was the executed King of England who lost his head via an axe on the scaffold at Whitehall in 1649. He'd been executed during the Civil War for treason and dubbed a murderer, a tyrant and a public enemy. But after he was killed, there was the question as to where to bury him. It needed to be without ceremony and away from the public eye, so Parliament gave permission for him to be buried in St. George's Chapel, and Henry VIII's tomb was chosen as the location. Charles lay in his restful state, his head supposedly sewn back on, until his coffin was discovered and explored in the search for his body in 1813. And this was by the Prince Regent, and here his head was examined to confirm it was him, before being covered back up. And then it was at this point that Henry VIII's coffin and Jane's coffin were also noted. Now, it was during the search for Charles I's remains that it was discovered that a 4th coffin lay in the vault. Upon the coffin of King Charles was a very small mahogany coffin covered in velvet crimson. This coffin is believed to house the remains of a stillborn child of Queen Anne. When this child died, we do not know, other than the fact that Anne was at the time the Princess of Denmark. So buried with Henry VIII is his 2nd wife, Jane Seymour. She is the only person whose coffin was ever meant to be there. But also, there is the coffin of Charles I, the executed king whose coffin was only buried here because this vault was seen to be unremarkable and the perfect place to bury a disgraced king. But also buried is a coffin of a small stillborn child of Queen Anne. Coffins had to be moved over to make space in this very small and easy-to-miss vault under the choir of St. George's Chapel in Windsor. And I wonder, what would Henry VIII have thought of that? Thank you for watching. And to support, please subscribe. Thank you.